Good evening and welcome once again to the Tzemach Bible Institute program. I'm John Klein, and with me tonight we have a very special guest all the way from Kiryat Arba, Hebron, Israel, Gary Cooperberg, the Executive Director of Project Shofar. Good evening, Gary.
Good evening, John.
Gary, I have a group of questions I want to ask you. You're living in Israel. You live in what would be called the West Bank in Judea, in the heart of Jewish territory in Judea. And you moved from the United States, and you believed, or you still believe, that God was doing something that caused you to move. Can you describe for us this redemption process that you in particular, and Israel in general, is engaged in today? The redemption process?
Well, most people are not aware of a redemption process. Most people really relate to what's going on in a normal way, as if everything is the way it is in other countries. Israel is different from all the countries in the world because Israel is part of a divine process. It's not, and it shouldn't be, a political concept. It should be a religious one. And if you recognize it as a religious concept, then all of the difficulties that we face become less. If you look at it strictly in a political, mundane terminology, then it's very difficult to continue going on with it because everything seems to be stacked against us. Our leaders are making all the wrong moves, making all the mistakes that they could possibly make. Our enemies are gathering around us, seeking our destruction. From a logical point of view, there's no future to Israel. But the concept of it being a religious process, a fulfillment of biblical destiny, when we see it as a process like that, then we realize that no amount of threat will ever come to fruition. And we can see it also in the very historical reality of the modern state of Israel. Logically speaking, it shouldn't have ever even come into existence. Logically speaking, it should have destroyed itself years ago. 59 years after the state was declared, not only hasn't it disappeared, but it's grown, it's improved qualitatively and quantitatively. And it defies logic how that could be. So anyone with eyes to see, it doesn't have to be a religious person, doesn't have to be a prophet. You just read the Bible and take a look at what's going on in Israel today, and you can't deny that it is a divine process, certainly not a political one. Because by political definitions, it shouldn't be.
Right. Well, as far as land mass and numbers of people, in the Middle East, Jews, there's 5 million Jews, maybe a little more. Almost 280 million Arab Muslims in the same area, all wanting to destroy you. And the reason, as Gary says, this is a divine process, and the reason it's being that the enemies of God haven't been able to wipe out Israel is, there's one scripture I really like, Jeremiah 31:10, where God says, "He who scattered Israel will regather Israel and keep them as a shepherd keeps his flock." And that you're living that out now. God dealt with you while you were not really secular, but not really observant like you are today, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and started this process in you.
It is a process that supersedes nature. You can see it that way. And rabbis also tell us that every nation in the world has a guardian angel watching over it except for one nation, the nation of Israel. God himself watches over us. Mm-hmm. And we can see that. If it wasn't for his divine protection every minute, we couldn't continue to exist.
Okay, now from the process, from this redemption process, how does the area, just like Judea, where Gary lives, or Samaria, where the settlements are in Judea and Samaria, and Jerusalem, and Bethel, Shiloh, all these biblical places mentioned in the Bible where God is giving to the Jewish people. How does that how does that differ from Tel Aviv or Haifa or any of these other places? Is there something different or special about the biblical spots in Israel versus the beachfront in Tel Aviv?
No, every inch of the land of Israel is holy.
Okay.
Every inch of it. Certainly there is more significance to some of these lands, the lands that are considered by God to be the holy cities of Israel. There are 4 holy cities. There's Jerusalem, Hebron, Svat, and Tiberias. These are the 4 holy cities. But every grain of sand is holy in the land of Israel. And there shouldn't really be a differentiation between one particular place and another, because it's all part of our commandment to return, to build, and to live our lives according to his law.
Okay, but the nations have declared it different. On one hand, they say, okay, you could live in Tel Aviv, but you can't live in Hebron. And that's what I was really getting at. In fact, you moved to Hebron, especially to Kiryat Arba.
Right. But it's very important to understand where are these assertions coming from. It's wishful thinking based on nothing, on less than nothing. We are given a concept that if only Israel would return Judea, Samaria, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, that we would have peace. But how quickly we forget, before 1967, the Arabs had Judea, Samaria, and East Jerusalem in their hands. They had complete control of it. Why did we go to war in 1967? And why do you think things are going to be better if we push the clock back to 1967 when we went to war and they had Judea, Samaria, and East Jerusalem? These are just excuses to try to chip away slowly, one chip at a time, to destroy the state of Israel. They don't want Judea, Samaria, and East Jerusalem. They want all of the state of Israel. They know they can't win in war, but they've discovered that maybe they can win in peace, because Israel's always willing to give something, We have no right to give anything. We don't even have anything to give. This is a little tiny homeland we have. We already gave 80% of what we were supposed to get from Great Britain, that was promised to us from Great Britain. It was stolen for us and given to an Arab sheikh from Saudi Arabia, and they named it Jordan. And Jordan doesn't have enough land. They only have 80% of our land. We have 20%. And from this little tiny 20%, which is tinier than any Arab nation, they need this land to make peace. How do you explain that logically? Why do they need? What do we have? Oil? We have gold? What is so special about this little tiny 20% of our own land?
So do you think then it's not a question of a homeland for the Palestinian people, it's a question of thwarting this redemption process that God has started?
The concept of a Palestinian people, first of all, it's a lie. There is no such thing as a Palestinian people. It was created in 1964 to give a reason to want to displace Jews, to say, well, they took away the land of the Palestinians and it should go back to them. They never had this land. No people had the land of Israel except the Jewish people. When God exiled us from our homeland, he put a curse on the land. And the curse was really a blessing. And the curse was, it will yield its fruit to nobody. It will be a barren wasteland. And if you read Innocents Abroad, written by Mark Twain, over 100 years ago, he describes a trip that he took to the Holy Land, and it was a wasteland. It was a place that nobody could live in.
A few Jews here, a few Arabs here, except for those 4 cities, and the Jewish population was the largest population in Jerusalem also.
And when Jews began to return to the land began to yield its fruit, just as it is written in the Bible. Mm-hmm. And we can see how the land developed only when the Jews came home.
So you believe then that you, as an observant Jew, living in the land of Israel, are fulfilling this mitzvot, this commandment to settle the land.
Exactly.
You're living out the Bible today.
We're not looking to take from anybody. We're looking to serve God. That's the bottom line. Mm-hmm. The people who are living there are fulfilling the destiny that was commanded to us by our God. This is what he wants. And if you look at the prophet Ezekiel, chapter 36, he explains God's feelings about this very, very clearly. And he says, and I dispersed you throughout the nations, and you desecrated my holy name when it was said of you, this is the people of God and they're outside of the land. The day will come when I will get tired of this desecration. And don't think that what I'm doing is for your sake. I'm doing it for the sake of my holy name that you desecrated by being outside of the land. When I lift you up before the nations of the world and plant you in your homeland. This is an angry God talking. It sounds like punishment that he's suggesting, but he also gives us the solution to desecrating his holy name. We can elevate his holy name. We can sanctify his holy name simply by coming home. If we don't do it on our own, he'll do it for us. But that's like a mother saying to the child, you don't wash those dishes, I'll wash the dishes. But woe to you if you don't wash those dishes. It's the same concept here. God is telling us, I want you to go home. You don't go home, I'll bring you home. But it won't be nice. It won't be pretty.
Okay, so he who scattered you has regathered you. So the biblical narrative is being lived out today. Bible is being fulfilled. Now, that could explain now why a nation that doesn't even border you, Iran, how their leader continuously makes these crazy threats against Israel to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. And he has his surrogates, Hamas and Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and Syria itself, all working for him. Do you think they're ready to attack Israel one more time?
We are setting ourselves up for that. After 1948, after 1967, after all the wars that we fought, and we showed our enemies that we're capable of beating them back every time they come. And of course, this was God leading us, not because we have a mighty army. But we frightened them and we drove them to feel that they can conquer us by peace if they can't conquer us by war. But in the last few things that my so-called leaders have done, starting with Barak retreating from Lebanon, from Mr. Olmert starting a war in Lebanon and not finishing it, from withdrawing from the Gaza, from all of Gaza, the Arab nations are looking at us and saying, well, hey, maybe now they're weak. Maybe now they don't know how to win a war. Maybe now is the time to attack them. And it's building up. And this also could be biblical. It could be leading to the time when all nations gather against Israel to destroy her.
All right. Now, we think it even possibly could be this summer. Here, the United States, Israel's biggest allies, and bogged down in Lebanon. Mr. Bush is just about a lame duck.
Iran, you mean?
Yes, in Iraq.
Iraq, yeah.
We'll get it.
Eventually, we'll figure it out.
We are bogged down in Iraq, and Mr. Bush is almost lame duck and weakened by the Democratic Congress. We read a report that they think something might happen this summer. Do you think something could happen that soon? Or
Look, redemption can happen overnight. I have no timetable. I don't know how it's going to happen. I know also that we can make it a better redemption if we follow God's laws. And Project Shofar, the whole concept behind it is to try to make Jews aware of their obligation to come home. I go back again to Ezekiel 36. This is God's will. This is what he wants for us. If we don't do it on our own and he has to do it, then we see terrible things happening. If we help to bring redemption a little bit sooner, then we can avoid a tremendous amount of needless suffering. And this is what we're trying to do. But if not, the redemption is going to come on. I mean, what are these nations doing when they gather against Israel? Why do they hate Israel? What do we have? How big are we? Why are we even important? Why does anybody care what goes on in Israel? It's illogical. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are plenty of places that are bigger, that have oil, that have something to fight for. What do we have? We have rocks. It's so tiny. Why should anybody care? And yet the President of the United States and everybody in the world seems to think that world peace depends upon us giving land, a little tiny bit, to nations that outnumber us overwhelmingly.
When you put it like that, the whole idea sounds ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. I mean, it's illogical. It's irrational.
Right.
Which also should prove to you it's a godly process. Right. Because that's the only thing.
Jews can live anywhere in the world, but they can't live in Hebron. Right? Their city.
Yeah.
The place where King David was crowned first, where ruled for 7 years. The place where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, and Leah are buried. Jews can't live there.
Look, the bottom line is, if we're honest about it, it's a war of ideology. The Arabs want to take over the world. And here we are in their backyard with sovereignty that is not Muslim sovereignty. This is the bone in their throat that they can't live with, because it weakens Allah. How can there be
You mean a sovereign Jewish
a
state?
sovereign Jewish state right in the middle of Islam territory? I mean, they believe that America is going to be theirs eventually too. They want the entire world to be under Islam, under Allah. That's their
Under Sharia law.
Their aim. And here, this little tiny, insignificant nation has declared sovereignty on what they consider Islamic soil, and so they will do anything in their power to remove this. This is a stain on Islam, on their religious beliefs.
Okay, well, I read the end of the book. As I always tell your wife, Andrea, I read the end of the book and we win. God is orchestrating events, and now he steps back sometimes and wants people like you of faith to come forward and live out your faith, speak faith. And you're on a tour right now of the United States. You've spoken to Christian groups and to Orthodox Jewish groups on this trip. What sort of response did you get from Christians in this country?
There's a growing number of Christians who have rethought their ideology, who have given up the notion that Israel is condemned to wander the four corners of the world forever and are cursed and were replaced by somebody else. Starting with 1948, when they saw that the Jewish people returned to the land of Israel exactly as the Bible predicted, they began to question the things that they had been taught over the centuries, and they have been seeking truth. They even came up with a concept of Christian Zionism, which is an interesting concept. But what it means is they recognize truth, they recognize God, and they want to come close to Him. And how do you come close to God? You come close to what He's doing. And what is He doing today? He's returning His people to the land of Israel in preparation for redemption. And these people want a piece of this process, and they deserve it. And they come and they want to help. And they have been helping. And I feel a need to respond to such expressions of support and to encourage such people. And it's a mutual thing. I go to encourage them, and in turn they encourage me. And it's just amazing how we both see things the same way, that God is indeed beginning the redemption, that we have insurmountable obstacles to it, that we can possibly overcome. But as I believe, honestly, if we do as much as we can, if we do the best we're able to do, then God does the miracles that we can't do. And
now, a lot of our audience, just like we are, Bible believers reading the scriptures. Now, you went to an Orthodox synagogue in New Jersey on this trip. What sort of reception did you receive there? Are there Jews and Christians seeing the same thing, maybe looking at it from different angles, but seeing the same thing, seeing God doing something in this day?
Well, thank God. It seems to me that even in the Jewish community, people are beginning to wake up and see reality. The commandment to live in the land is an eternal commandment that always existed. Prior to 1948, it was a near impossible thing to do, although there were Jews even then who lived in the land under the most difficult and impossible conditions. But the commandment was always there. But in 1948, when we had returned to the state and reestablished our sovereignty there, there's no longer a reason for a Jew to remain outside of the land. And by willingly remaining in exile, it's like turning your back on God's commandments. Now, for the most part, the Jew who lives in the United States of America has a good life. He's very happy here. And he looks at the newspapers and sees what's going on in Israel. He doesn't want any part of that. And I can't blame him either. From the way things look, it looks much more difficult here. The point of living in the land of Israel today is to demonstrate our faith in God. By demonstrating our faith in God, we're demonstrating to the world that there is a God. When we turn our back on God, when we demonstrate that we don't believe in Him, well, that's the desecration. That's exactly the problem. I think more and more Orthodox Jews today are beginning to wake up to the need to come home. Maybe I was just fortunate that I found this particular community in East Brunswick, but clearly they're aware of the importance of the land of Israel to the Jewish people. In this particular community, many of them have relatives and children who live in the land, who are making plans to leave America when they retire and move to Israel. It was a good audience. I did not have any arguments with them, except for some people who were afraid. There were people who came up to me and said, I can't make a living in Israel. Why should I go there to starve? It's impossible. And at that point I said to him, that last word you said, I don't understand. It's not in my vocabulary, the word impossible. Anything's possible. You have to give God a chance.
With God, all things are
exactly.
possible.
You give God a chance, you'll find your way. But I also told him, I said, listen, right now, it's not the last minute. We're not being thrown out of America. That day may come too. And when that happens, you won't have a chance to prepare anything, to take anything with you, to find a job, to find a home. So right now, when it's easy, stay in your home. Don't give up your job. Come and visit, look around, and see if you can find something. If you look hard enough, you'll find something. But don't feel that you're under pressure or anything, but don't say it's impossible. If you say something's impossible, then for you it's impossible, because you're not even going to try.
Okay, Gary, you said some people were afraid. From an Israeli perspective, how do you think this war against Islamic terrorism is going in the world?
I don't think there is a war against Islamic terrorism. I really don't. First of all, President Bush, although he speaks very nicely, he hasn't addressed the root issues of the war. I mean, if you take Saudi Arabia as a partner, then you're not recognizing the problem, because Saudi Arabia is part of the problem. You're not going to solve it that way. No, we have to be strong as Jews, and our number one priority must be to observe God's law. We're not going to make peace by defying God's law, by going against God's will. To give away God's land that he gave us miraculously is a slap in the face to God. And you can't hope to achieve peace by going against godly miracles. That's a foolish thing to do. My politicians don't really believe in God. They are politicians. They want to be like all the other nations of the world. Yitzhak Rabin said in the Knesset, we are no longer a nation that stands alone, not to be reckoned among the nations of the world. He rewrote the Bible. It's not true what he said, but he revealed that he doesn't really believe in the Word of God. He believes in politics. And all of my leaders are like that, and this is why we suffer. That's the only reason we have terrorism in Israel today, because our leaders don't believe in God. When that changes, everything else will change too.
So are you looking for the government to change over anytime soon? Mr. Olmert falling from power, and who do you think will be next, or who do you see as a future leader right now? I know from our perspective we want to see a man of faith or a woman of faith leading the nation, preferably someone who believes just like Gary, to trust God, to fear God more than man. But who do you see on the horizon? Do you see anybody like that on the horizon?
I'm very sorry to say that our political system is so corrupt, is so entrenched in itself, is so self-perpetuating, that it cannot tolerate any challenge to it. And it will not accept. If somebody would get up and speak as a proud Jew, they would eat him up and spit him out. First of all, I don't see anybody like that on the scene. I really don't. And given the political system that we presently have, even if there was somebody like that, he wouldn't last a minute, because they would not permit it.
So you don't see much hope for this system?
The system has to change. The system has to change completely. In this country, we have something called the elastic law, the elastic clause, excuse me. The elastic clause says that when the government no longer serves the purpose of the people, it is the right and the duty of the people to change the government, to redo the whole system of government so that it serves the people as it was originally meant to do. We don't have such a clause in Israel. And my government is a self-serving one. It doesn't serve the people. It serves its own political interests. So that's not the way it's going to happen. And that's why my concept is I'm reaching out to Jews and asking them to come home. And a lot of people think that's crazy. Well, how's that going to help? They're going to come home, so they're going to be subjugated to the same crazy people. But God told us that this is how we can elevate his holy name. If we can demonstrate our faith and do a human miracle, this is a miracle that he gave us to do. Go against our nature, go against logic, go against what's safe and what's good, and demonstrate our faith, then God will do the miracles. He will change the country around. He will find the Jew who is living someplace in Israel today, maybe in the Russian compound, who is the next king of Israel. And the prophet Elijah will come and anoint him, and then we will see the Israel that we've been waiting for.
Okay, so we're ready to see that. We're excited about what we see. As you could see, Project Shofar is actually, Gary is the director and the founder of Project Shofar. We help him here at Fellowship Church. And if you want to be involved, Gary, this trip that Gary took from Israel to the United States is paid for by donations from Christians and Jews that see this message as the valid, very important message today. Now there are organizations helping the Jews from former Soviet Union return to Israel, and that's wonderful. It's the American Jew who's fat and happy, as Gary said, safe here and prosperous, that isn't going home. And Gary's mission is to speak to them, to tell the Jews that, hey, God's calling us home. God's in the redemption process, and it's happening in the midst of Israel.
Right.
All right, so we all agree with that. And if you'd like to be involved, that's great. That's why Gary's here, to solicit your help in this godly task. I just want to ask you a question about, do you think Israel, and to get back to that Iran thing and the atomic bomb, do you think Israel's ready to do anything if Iran gets the atomic bomb? And do you think the United States would back Israel up in this? Or what do you think's happening?
Well, historically, we've never seen that. But we read in our Passover Haggadah, it says very clearly, in every generation there arise those who come to destroy us. And every time God comes and intervenes and protects us from their hands. This is just one more threat against our existence by very, very viable enemies who can destroy us, it would seem. But God will protect us, as he always has. And we do not have to worry about whether the United States is going to help us, because that's not where our redemption comes from. It comes from our God.
Okay, as a famous rabbi once said, if God is for you, who could be against you? Well, as you see, listen, we're going up, taking a trip to Israel ourselves from here in the end of October, beginning of November. We're going to go down to Kiryat Arba, to Hebron, and see Gary and his wife and the Hesdy Yeshiva there where he works. And Gary personally is going to take us to the cave of Machpelah, where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, and Leah buried.
And Adam and Eve.
That's right. So, and Adam and Eve, according to Jewish custom. So if you'd like to join us, give us a call. Well, that's our program for this evening. Shalom.